All right, everybody, thanks for being here, and thanks for attending the Lasker Lessons in Leadership event that we're focusing on effective leadership and communication. I first off want to just start by thanking a few people. Randy Belletta, President of the International Biomedical Research Alliance, for her help with supporting and organizing the events today. Also want to thank Beatrice Renaud from the Albert and Mary Lasker Foundation for being here today. We really appreciate their support. Also want to thank Katie, Angela, and Kevin for all their organizational work with today's events. Really couldn't do it without them. I also want to thank Alec Nichols and Kara Fulton from the GPP. They're on the Graduate Student Council. Are they here today, hopefully? Can you guys stand up so we can see who you are? They help open up the event to other students at the NIH in the Graduate Partnership Program, and we have about 10 new students that have joined the program, the four-year program, so we really appreciate them being here as well. And finally, I want to thank Dr. Freed for accepting our invitation to be here today. We really appreciate you being here, and I'm going to invite Kathy Zune up to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's been about a year since I've started working with the Alliance and NIH to help facilitate and move this program forward, and it's been a pleasure working with the Lasker Foundation to do so. It's a great program. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to hear the introduction I gave to the program several days ago last week, I do have slides, and we can make those available to you so you can again see the composition of the program. It's a wonderful program with a lot of wonderful support from both the NIH, the Alliance, and from the Lasker Foundation. So thank you. I now have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. To me, it's particularly a pleasure because we have some common roots in public health, which I think is always a wonderful opportunity. And for many of the students here, I know you are all interested in public health as well as basic research. So Dr. Linda Freed here is Dean of the Mailman School of Public Health and the De Lamar Professor of Public Health Practice. And she's also Senior Vice President at Columbia University Medical Center Mailman School of Public Health. And that is an extremely highly respected program. It's actually one of the top programs in the United States. Before coming to Columbia, Dr. Freed did some of her training at one of my alma maters, which is Johns Hopkins, and she actually, when she was there, founded the Johns Hopkins Center on Aging and Health and directed a program in epidemiology and biostatistics of aging, as well as the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology. And she held numerous appointments in medicine, nursing, and public health. So she went on then to Columbia, and her leadership at Columbia has been extraordinary. She has been a leader in transforming the health of populations and has led the school on the first program on climate and health, and has really set up a number of programs on aging at the Mailman School of Public Health. One of the things that I think is really impressive is not only her leadership skills and how visionary she is, but also she is a very, very productive scientist and has been recognized in the fields of epidemiology and geriatric through her scientific achievements. And this is acknowledged by her numerous awards that she has given. I have a list of probably 50, but I'm one especially that I think is important to point out is she's a member of the National Academy of Medicine, which is a very prestigious, it used to be called the Institute of Medicine. It's now reinvented themselves. And she's as well as a member of the Association of American Physicians. She's on numerous boards. So I think all in all, Dr. Freed is just a wonderful keynote speaker for you here this morning to talk about leadership in communication. So without further ado, Dr. Freed.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. Absolutely thrilled. Thank you for the invitation. What I'd like to do is tackle the assignment I was given, which is a little daunting for anybody. But I was asked to speak about leadership progression, and communication from the point of view of my own career. That's a lot to put together. And my career as a scientist, clinician, and public health person, which I have actually had the deep privilege of bringing all those together in many different ways over the course of my own career. So I'll try and share some of that with you, but hopefully in a way that can help you in your own careers, which is really all of our goal here. Because this program is dedicated to offering you the training needed to become our future clinical health science, public health leaders, and we need you, big time. And we're not the only ones who need you. I'll quote from David McCullough, who's a very famous, highly regarded American historian, who said, and I quote, "We need leaders, and not just political leaders. We need leaders in every field, every institution, in all kinds of situations. We need to be educating our young people to be leaders. And unfortunately, that's fallen out of fashion," end quote. Now, very often when I have spoken over the years to my mentees, to my faculty, leadership is not a term that always resonates with scientists in particular. And in fact, I think in general the response is, not me, not interested, I have no plans to be a dean. That's okay. I didn't necessarily plan to be a dean either. But what's not okay is not to understand what leadership is, because in fact, you are becoming leaders already. So, but it's important to know what that means. So I'd like to offer you three theses today. As I thought about the charge, and three theses and a couple facts. The three theses, which really come from my own lived experience, are first that scientists, all of us, need leaders. And science needs leaders. And they better be great. We need them to be great. The second thesis, I believe, is that scientists are leaders. And particularly by the nature of health science. Health science is about creating knowledge for a better future. And that's a leadership frame. And third thesis that I'd like to offer is that science matters in the world, which is why we do what we do. It matters in the world when it becomes leadership, and that happens through communication. And science leads to more change, which is our mission, knowledge for change, when scientists own being leaders. So I'll do my best to, I've never given this talk before, I made it up for you. I'll do my best to try and weave those together and add a few foundational facts, of course, which is that leadership has many flavors. It's not just being a dean or a department chair or a center director, but there's research leadership. Many of our colleagues, like Dr. Zun at the NIH, are research leaders, as well as administrative leaders. There's educational leadership. There's leadership and roles in industry and policy and a million other roles that over our careers will evolve, sometimes surprise us, and many of the senior people in the audience can speak to that. But the skill sets are and the way we think are heavily the same. And finally, I have come to believe that leadership is developed at every single stage of what you do, starting right now. And that the foundations of leadership skills occur now, and you will use them no matter where you end up and build on them forever. So let me start with the first thesis. And the first thesis is that scientists need leaders, and they need the right kind of leaders. That may seem intuitively obvious, but I have to say that the first time I ever started to think about this explicitly was when I was a trainee and young faculty member, and unfortunately had the experience of some very negative leadership. Interestingly, as I reflect on it, this heavily had to do with being a woman in a man's world, and the leadership I experienced was very not intentionally malignant, but by the world we lived in, the leadership behavior patterns ended up really discrediting who I was, what I did, and the experience of feeling discounted, marginalized, and invisible from the leadership is a game stopper, actually. And I learned that kind of leadership has very serious impacts on shutting down one's own aspirations, hope, and even creativity. And so that's a serious set of issues if you have aspirations, particularly if aspirations are dependent on those things. And the recurrent negative impacts of that kind of leadership as a trainee and a young faculty member told me that leadership really matters, and that my leaders critically mattered to my own career. Now, really luckily for me, I also had many examples of positive leadership, and the comparison was striking. And critical at every stage, but in my early career is the reason I'm still here. It's the reason having positive leaders, the model of positive leaders, the experience of positive leaders, is the reason my career didn't end prematurely and gave me reason to understand why positive leadership matters. Now, I learned about leadership early on in a very explicit way from my then department chair when I just joined the faculty at Johns Hopkins in the School of Medicine. And Jack had just come as the chair of the Department of Medicine. And we worked actually, as it turned out, very, very closely together over many years. But he demonstrated recurrently to me the aspects of principled leadership that make a great institution and that enable people to meet their dreams and aspirations. And that's the stuff we weave. There were so many things that Jack did that mattered to a young faculty member. First of all, leadership that believes in your goals and thinks you can do them. How much more important a thing can you have? Leadership that shows up when you need them to support your success. Somebody who's there when you have a site visit. Somebody who nominates you for opportunities, looks out for your future, believes in where you want to go, and can help you really establish the platforms to get there. And leaders who don't kill the messenger. Really important. So that they are there to hear when things aren't right at an institutional level, at a personal level, and don't fault the person who brought the message, but are actually grateful for it. Because then you have the news that you need to address as a leader. All of those things I learned from Jack. Those kinds of learnings, as you watch leaders, are formative for setting a vision of why leadership matters and what leadership matters. The other thing I learned is that it makes all the difference in the world to be able to walk into a place in the morning where you know that your goals, what you're trying to do, is aligned with the vision of the people above you. That your goals are aligned with the leadership's vision and goals, that they see what you're doing as making their vision possible. That's an alignment that makes everything possible, and without it, dampens the potential. And a lot of understanding that depends on communication. Your leader's ability to communicate, your ability to hear that communication, your ability to say where you want to go and what you want to accomplish, which are core responsibilities that we have in what we do. The other thing I learned is that if you're in an environment where the leadership believes in where you're going and where you're aligned with where the leadership wants to go, you don't have to watch your back. And not having to watch your back liberates the creativity of science. For me, that was an immensely important lesson, not just for me, but for a number of my peers, how much that matters. So I hope those observations are important and useful for you, but you learn things the easy way and the hard way, and I think the leaders we have, the leaders you have, make all the difference in the world in where you get to and where science gets to and how science matters in our world. And those all affect, again, in a very virtuous cycle, what you'll be able to accomplish. And of course, I also now know that institutions with effective leadership do better, and effective leadership supports great science and utilizes the results of the science, which is what we want. And I'll talk about that a little later on. So my second thesis that I'd like to offer to you is that by who we are and how we're trained and what our aspirations are, scientists are leaders. The two are inextricably woven, even if you're not thinking about yourself that way. And I'd like to explain what I mean by that. So Warren Bennis, who is one of the kind of gurus of thinking about leadership and management in the business world, has said that leaders think about what and why, and managers think about how and when. So even by that little definition, I would say that scientists and certainly clinicians are in the what and why category by mission. By mission. You also have to learn the how and when in order to accomplish it. But Bennis also said that leaders are those who master the context, understand the big picture, are striving for solutions, and in that premise challenging the status quo. And I would bet every single person in this room does that every single day, just by definition of the training you're in and the goals you have. But also that Bennis says leaders are people who have a long-range perspective, are responsible for seeing the horizon, which you also, by definition of what your goals are, have to do, to understand the big problems you're trying to tackle, what the long-range goals would be, and then how you line up the present to serve those future goals to help you get there. Those are leadership questions. That is leadership thinking. And finally, that leaders are people who are about doing the right thing. Managers do it right. Leaders try and make sure that what's being done is the right thing. And by being able to articulate all of that, by being able to communicate it, you inspire both trust and motivation for others to join you, whether it's your lab staff, your colleagues, or others. So I would argue that by Bennis's definition, you all, just by signing up and being here and engaging in the training you're engaging in, are leaders. And I would say that leadership, by Bennis's definition, is a way of thinking. So actually, in his book on becoming a leader, Warren Bennis said that you have to think about the differences between education and training. So you all are being educated. You're also being trained. What are the differences? Well, he uses a bunch of words which I'll throw out to you to show the difference. He says that training is firm, static, memorizing facts, narrow, surface, rote, answers, content, tactics, reactive, short-term, common sense, left brain. And he says that education, which I believe you all are very much in the middle of, is inductive, tentative, dynamic, involves understanding, ideas, broad, deep, experiential, active, questioning, questions, process, strategy, alternatives, exploration, discovery, active, long-term change, risk, synthesis, open imagination, whole brain. Which camp are you in? I think it's easy to say. And our motivations in science for health in particular, for health, are about doing the right thing. And the way we are trained to think is absolutely the training for leadership thinking, I believe, although that is not often said. So I think that scientists are leaders by these basic definitions of leaders. So if you say I'm not a leader, you're wrong already. And the other thing is what our motivation is. So we are leaders dedicated to improving the public good through our science, through our art, through our practice, to improve health for everybody. And because of that dedication, because of that mission, because of our values, we actually are entrusted in a unique way by the public with that responsibility to create that knowledge for a better collective future. And we are given the privilege of doing what you all are doing and what I get to do, which is to create your own vision. We are invested in to create a vision of what matters and to be able to follow it through until, for as long as it takes, until the answers are right and great and matter. I mean, that's an extraordinary privilege of leadership and a responsibility. Now, I was not someone who always thought she was going to be a scientist. In fact, if you had told me when I was in college I was going to be a scientist or even a doctor, I would have told you you didn't know me. But I came to it over time, after college, by really being moved by the health problems that people had, the importance of health in people's lives, the fact that health or illness determined people's fate, and that initially that clinical medicine would be the path to solve it. And then as I learned the limits of what we knew in clinical medicine, I realized that we also needed science. That there were too many things that we didn't understand, too many things we needed to be able to solve in order to be able to create the optimal opportunity for health. Now, I had the luck of discovering epidemiology, which is my science, the science of prevention, and I was completely blown away by the power of it, but also the art of the science, the analytical nature of epidemiology in particular, but of science in general, and the creativity that science enables once you know how to do it. And the creativity that you have to be able to employ in order to create knowledge that didn't exist before. Now, I certainly didn't know at the start if I was going to be a successful scientist. It took me a long time to even conclude that I might have a prayer of doing it. But I certainly felt that I needed to try. And after almost 30 years now as a population scientist, epidemiologist, as well as a clinician, I can say that I probably am among the luckiest people in the entire world, because I get to work every day on things that I passionately believe matter, that I'm wildly excited about, and where I also believe that the solutions to what I'm working on matter to people and to our society. And that's not a statement that when you're in training you feel comfortable making. It takes a while to get to the point that you're willing to say that out loud. It seems presumptuous, but that's why we do what we do. And it matters to people, it matters to their families, it matters to society that we find those answers. Now, those are leadership statements, which I think you all feel. But I'm also wildly lucky to work in settings that provide the conditions supportive of mission and creativity. And that's a function of leadership. That's a function of leadership that I've worked under across my career, and hopefully now over the last decade or two, the leadership that I can provide. Now, much of, when I think about the science that I still do, much of it I laid the seeds for when I was at your stage. Who knew that was going to happen? I certainly didn't. But to have the privilege of being able to burrow deep into the science lays out agendas and paths that will be a constant discovery for the rest of your lives. And it's fantastic. And you go so deep that you can see things that nobody ever saw before. How fabulously exciting. But the ability to take those leaps into the unknowns requires what you're doing now. First, to learn the skills, the knowledge and skills of the area that you're in. Second, to learn how to think, how to discipline your mind, and how to discipline time. Because one of the challenges of what we do and the responsibilities is to learn how to discipline time, because nobody else can ever tell you how to do it. There's a really interesting guy, Professor Dereserwich, who's written that leaders, and I include scientists in this for the reasons I've tried to explain to you, leaders have to learn how to engage in solitude, and apply their disciplinary expertise to the process of inquiry, of understanding what matters, and how we can understand it better. And he says then, much probably to many people's shock, these are the skills of leadership. Now, in the health sciences, our mission is this kind of inquiry with application. To understand the factors that challenge health, to understand biology, physiology, how the environmental modifications shift who we are at every level, and with an eye to understanding then how to improve health and prevent disease and treat it, or best invest in the creation of health. Now, this is the definition of innovation, is creativity with a purpose, and that's what I just described. And the first stage of leadership which you're engaged in is building the expertise and the skills to dig deep into yourself to figure out the path that you're wildly passionate about and have the ability to create it with mentorship, et cetera, et cetera. But this discipline of solitude, which is the first stage of leadership, only works actually if you can learn to communicate it. Michelangelo said that so he was a bit of a master at what he did, I would say. if you picture one of his sculptures in your mind, I bet everybody here can pick a Michelangelo sculpture and imagine it. He said, sculpting, even in marble, is merely the art of revealing the figure that's in the stone. Kind of extraordinary. Now, I believe that's what science does. The same thing. We have a thesis, we have an image of what truth might be. And our expertise, our skills, our tools, our craft are about helping reveal that figure we can see that's hidden in the stone so others can see it and so we can see if it's really there. But it only ultimately matters if you can communicate about it. If you can tell others, if you can share what you learned, if you can change the way others think, if you can change how we use that knowledge. And that is when science becomes leadership through communication. And it happens at every stage. I mean, for you all, it starts with the art of the relationships of communicating with your mentors and guides, being able to explain the image in the stone that you see and where you want to get with it. So that they can help you because they can now see it too. It matters when you write a paper, how you communicate. First, it'll determine if you get it published, but secondly, it'll determine how much difference your learning and knowledge creation makes in the world, how you communicate it, and of course it determines whether a grant gets funded. Now, one of the key responsibilities of science that in this country, which we have, is sort of, I think in our DNA by the time our training's done, is that we're responsible to communicate knowledge, share it freely, make it accessible to everybody in the world so we can all use it, learn from it, and do better because of it. That's our key responsibility. So how we communicate on that as scientists is a leadership action and a core responsibility of who we are. Now, it's not easy. I have to say that one of the critically hard things in my career, which I still work out like a fiend, is written communication. Oral communication is also hard. But I remember actually, anybody here have written an abstract in their life? Can you remember how long it took you to write your first abstract? Mine took well over a month. Going back and forth with my mentor, he must have X'd out everything I wrote 45 times over the course of a month, and I had to rewrite it every time. It was a work of at least a month to write that abstract, having done the science, just learning how to write the abstract. And now, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how few minutes it takes. But that's many years later. You learn how to do these things, but you sweat like crazy. It's so hard when you start. But it becomes a critical skill of who you are as a leader. And then you learn lots of new tools in your communications toolkit in order to have a place at the table, whether it's orally or in written form. How do you speak in science? What words do you use about your science for different constituencies? If you go and talk to your boss about science, how you talk about your science probably is different than how you talk to your lab members, or how you talk to a class of high school students when you go as an eminent scientist and tell them what science is all about. So how you speak science is hard enough, but how you vary it for who's listening so they can hear it is a critical art. And then there are lots of other dimensions of it. I certainly learned as a woman in science, a woman in academic medicine, that how I talked mattered in terms of whether I got heard. And I could say the same thing, but if I said it in different tones, if I said it the way a man would say it as opposed to the way a woman would say it, how I got heard was really different. And you have to develop tools in your leadership toolkit that you can pull out. So at different moments, you have a repertoire to draw on. Women are socialized to speak differently than men as little kids. Academic medicine brings out all the male attributes of communication, as far as I can tell, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But you have to be able to play in that verbal field. And that's a skill development also in communication. The other things you learn about communication to be a leader is that things nobody ever writes about, and rarely, I've never heard anybody talk about. Like when there is no presentation that's informal, right? The senior people in the audience are saying yes. We all know that. If you get called up as a trainee or a young faculty member for an informal discussion about your science, and you walk in and everybody's in shirt sleeves, no ties around the table, a bunch of old coffee cups, but they're all your bosses, that's not an informal discussion about your science. And in some ways, it's a harder presentation to prepare for because you don't have slides. The preparation time is at least as much for an informal discussion and presentation than for a formal one. So there are many rules and guidelines of communication which are important for you to know because they position you to be heard. They position you for people to believe in what you see and where you want to go. And that's leadership. And how you get what's in your head out into the world is the art of leadership communication, and that's our responsibility. And it's not easy. I learned a few other things when I was in my early years as a scientist. One was that some of the things you are most excited about, you sweat over something for years and years and years. You know it better than anybody in the world by the time you're done trying to figure out even what you're thinking about. You know everything in the world about it. And then you're so well positioned at some moment to make a leap. You do what the brain does so well at 4 in the morning when you wake up and you're just relaxed and you're thinking, and then you suddenly figure out what the huge leap is. How do you bring people along on that? That is one of the biggest challenges of leadership communication in science, because because until you figure that one out, you can't publish it, and no one will believe it. I assure you, from long experience. Because you've just in your work, in your mind, you have, over years, you have gone from A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E, E to F, F to G, G to H, and so on, up maybe to M or N in the line of thinking. And from where you are in N, you suddenly can see what Z might be. But the rest of the world is still back at D. And your journey from D to M doesn't seem plausible at all to them. And so one of the key arts, I think, of communication for leadership is then being able to make explicit what happens after D, which only you can see. Does that make sense? And if you can't figure out how to make explicit what was in some ways intuitive and implicit in your own mind, no one will come on the journey with you. Because the distance from D to Z is too broad to believe in. But if you can help them see M, N, P, Q, R, and S, then Z seems plausible. So I'll end with a few thoughts about leadership progression, because these arts of communication, so that science matters in the world, position you to be a leader, and you grow. I often think of the metaphor of music. I'm not a good musician, but I had a mother who was. And, we are are expected to show up knowing how to tune our violin and how to play it. And that's really the basic training of science, of medicine, of public health. And then you play it enough that you're used to playing your solos, but you'd really love to play some duets. You'd really love the music that would result from that. You can hear it, but you can't do it solo. And so you start playing duets. And then you think, oh, God, I'd love to play that chamber music. And suddenly you have a bunch of colleagues, and you're playing 4 and 5 people in a chamber group, because that's music you could play that you can't play solo. And then over time you think, well, there's another repertoire. Some of it's written, and some of it I would love to write that would require perhaps a choral group. And suddenly you're learning how to conduct a choral group. You never planned to do it, but you want to be able to do that music. And then, lo and behold, you've done that music for a while, and you can see that there's an orchestra score in your head that you would love to learn how to play. And so suddenly you're learning how to conduct an orchestra, and you're gathering an orchestra of everybody who knows how to tune their own violin and play it really well, so they can show up and learn how to play together in a similar way. To me, that's the progression of leadership in science, in academia, administratively, and in all the fields that we're trained for. That's the progression of why people end up in formal leadership roles, is because there's music that matters to them, that they think matters in the world, that they're ready to engage with, and they want to be part of making it happen. That's the motivation to leadership at a formal level. You all are leaders already. And being a dean is exactly about that. If you want to know why people are deans, it's not because you want to spend your life balancing a budget. You know how to balance a budget, but that's not why you do it. You do it for the music of who we should be in the world. You do it because you're ready to accomplish things at that level that will serve the mission you all are engaged in. And you're ready to enable others. And you believe in the power of institutions to change the world. So that brings me to my third and last point, which is that I believe that science becomes leadership by means of communication. I hope I've made that point in ways that make sense to you. The bridge between science and leadership is communication, and that leaders inspire and motivate to a vision, mission, and excellence that enables us to change the world for the better through what we do. A guy named Peter Economy, who writes in the business leadership literature, which you can tell I have read for many decades, it's very helpful, says that, if you put together all the aspects of leadership, what emerges is what we want in the world in any field, which is truly inspiring leaders. Someone who communicates clearly, concisely, and often, and by doing so motivates everyone to give his or her best all of the time. They challenge their people by setting high but attainable standards and expectations, and then giving them the support, tools, training, and latitude to pursue those goals and become the best they can possibly be. And that's what you all are doing. We get stuck, I think, as leaders in not knowing how to communicate in the world, and the challenge for all of us is that our training, while our training is education for leadership, our training teaches us to think in ways that don't inspire and motivate the rest of the world. How are you trained to think? How am I trained to think? We're trained to think based on theses, years of painful, painstaking, slow progression from point A to point B to point B to point C, with theses between each of them and caveats and lack of certitude and needing to add the next bit of evidence without, for 30 years, being able to make a strong assertion of what the discovery is, right? That's how we're trained, to be careful, to be humble in our conclusions. And when we write like that. And journalists always would say the way a scientist is trained to think, speak, and write buries the lead. The last sentence of your paper, journalists will make the first sentence of their article, because that's what motivates, that's what inspires, that's what tells people why you were doing it and where you are and what matters. But we put it at the end. And by that time, people's minds are stuffed with jargon, haven't understood what we've said, and we lose the world. So ultimately, the challenge of communication for leadership is learning how to tell people the bottom line of the article first, what matters, why it matters, and what the place of science is in figuring it out, and how to say the 30-second elevator speech of what you're discovering at the front of the article, not the bottom. So I'll end by quoting John Gardner, another amazing leader in our world. You may know John Gardner. He created Common Cause many years ago. He was the head of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services when it used to be HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. And he said, leaders have a significant role in creating the state of mind that is the society. They can serve as symbols of the moral unity of a society. They can express values that hold the society together. But most important, they can conceive and articulate goals that lift people out of their petty preoccupations, carry them above the conflicts that tear a society apart, and unite them in pursuit of objectives worthy of their best efforts. That's the kind of leadership we need. That's the kind of leadership for science and health that our country needs. And it is the leadership that you all are invested in the creation and deployment of knowledge for the public good and for better health. So I thank you all for all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to open it up to some questions from the audience for Linda, if that's okay. Oh, that's okay. Carry your coffee. Any questions?
We have time just for a couple.
Yeah.
Things on track. So if anybody has a burning question, we'd love to hear it.
Yes.
You mentioned some business leadership material and things like that. So what are some writers or thinkers that have influenced how you think, I guess, about leadership and then just broader, just how you think of the world?
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting question. There's so many people who I've read at one point or another. Depends what you're going for, but actually the business literature is the literature that really wrestles with what leadership is, and I would commend it. And Warren Bennis is on Becoming a Leader is a classic. But there are many others as well. I'd have to. It depends on what you want, and I think it's important to look out at this literature. So I appreciate the question. Actually, John Gardner wrote a wonderful book on being a leader, which I would commend. It's even in paper. They're all in paperback. You can get them anywhere. The issues of leadership are so important, and yet they don't infuse medicine and science adequately. And I hope I made the case for why they're important. But there are both skills and cognitive frames of leadership that I think help us tremendously to use, to be able to construct an image of where we are and why we're doing what we're doing. So those are two thoughts to start with. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes?
As you developed as a communicator and a leader in your career, how did you measure your progress? So, like, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, he's an effective science communicator, and he, while it seems natural, he, in his own description of how he perfects the way that he communicates, he often will review speeches or things like that with spreadsheets and things like that to assess how effective he is presenting the information that he wants to present. So did you do something like that in your own career?
Oh, I've done I would say I've always done little things. I don't know if I did anything cataclysmic, but so I've always taken, you can find these 1 or 2 day management and leadership courses. Sometimes they're dud, but often they're really valuable. I have over the years, I don't know that I think about myself as a great communicator. I don't know how to rate my own communication, but I have tried to build my skills over the years, including taking formal courses a few times on communication, sometimes from journalists. So we actually at the Mailman School of Public Health are training all of our faculty in the Public Voices program that is run from a public science advocacy group, which I'm blocking the name of. I'm embarrassed. Because we have to develop the skills in all of our colleagues to be able to do this. So that's actually a 2-day training program in speaking and writing for the press. How do you do that? Those are really helpful. I know all the faculty who have been taking those courses think they're game changing for them.
So you mentioned briefly the challenges you had being sort of born in that world. Now, I think biomedicine generally has a much more balanced sort of gender distribution than a lot of fields. But still, like, because in my field, system neuroscience, we have, something like 10 males per female. So we still have this incredible sort of discrepancy there. And I imagine it's probably quite difficult being a woman in particular in my field. So could you give sort of some examples of the challenges you face and how perhaps people, leaders in that field might address that?
That's a really important question. I could talk about it for about 3 hours. I'm trying to think where to start. I think the first critical thing is that everybody in this room recognize that this still is a big deal. You can do head counts at institutions of, we have equal numbers of this or that, but you have to look at the culture to know how it affects people. And certainly in your field, the numbers speak for themselves. So that's the first thing, is that the whole community has to own that this could be an issue and not make it legitimate to talk about, to inquire about. We're scientists. We should be able to inquire about these issues in ways that are legitimizing to develop the hypotheses and to work on them and to support each other. The second critical thing is that the men in the audience ask the question, just as you did. Because this is not a women's only question, and medicine and science particularly have 100+ year histories of being established by and for white men and who historically who had women at home as wives taking care of everything. Now, now we have a world of diversity of race and ethnicity and culture and gender, etc., where the culture has not completed its evolution to be inclusive, respectful, and able to value difference and see what an asset it is. That's the journey we're on, but we're not there, and it's important to say that. And for we will all be better as a community, as a society, if we can own that we're on a journey. The history, when I read the history of the U.S., it's a history of people who felt marginalized, who didn't feel like they had the same rights, trying to obtain the rights we value, the opportunities that this country is about. And I think science is, in some ways, late to the game about those issues. They deeply affect people's sense of self, ability to become leaders, ability to feel that what they're doing, which science is risky. Science is really risky, right? You're sticking your neck out to think about things nobody ever had the guts to or even saw before, right? That's pretty risky. You have to be in a community that cares about you. And if the culture precludes that, and I certainly experienced that as a, for many years as a faculty member, then the community together has to solve it. Now, we did that over many years in the Johns Hopkins Department of Medicine and more broadly in the School of Medicine and more broadly at the university, but it was the intentional work by the people in the community to own the problem, to learn to talk about it, to respect its dimensions, and to be in there to solve it. That was the critical piece, and the leadership had to lead on it.
Thank you.
There's 3 hours more after that, but
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Freed. And I'd now like to introduce Dr. Beatrice Renaud, who will present the Albert and Mary Lasker Foundation Award to you.
Dr. Fried, just to say thank you for coming and being part of this program. It was very inspirational, and I hope the students and the residents will take some of your advice, and it will help them in their career, in their choices, and in the future. So I just have a little token of appreciation to give you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
and
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. So now it's the panel, I think.
So now I'm going to ask Dr. Freed to come up and join us for the panel discussion. I'm sure there were several more questions that you had for Dr. Freed that you can pose during the panel discussion and have the other panelists come up, which is me. Elaine Ostrander was supposed to be one of our panelists today, but she got stuck at a meeting, so I'm stepping in to give her perspective on communication and presentations. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Bernstock, MD PhD student in the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program, and I have the pleasure of introducing the panel today that will further the discussion that we've just begun to have. And before I do that, I just want to again thank Dr. Freed for a really stimulating discussion, some fantastic messages and pearls for those of us setting out in science and medicine, so thank you for that. It's a truly distinguished panel, some very interesting bios. We can't do them justice, so if I can just briefly introduce folks and a little bit about who they are. Dr. Nguyen, I think most of us know, the chief of the immunopathogenesis section at the Laboratory of Parasitic Disease, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. He's also the scientific director of our program, the NIH Oxford Cambridge program. We have Dr. Linda Nguyen with us. She's the scientific writer and editor and a public communications branch at the Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development here at the NIH. And we have Dr. Michelle Hogan, who's the executive director of the American Association of Immunologists, which is really a global force for those in the field of immunology. And so, to sort of begin the discussion, do folks have further questions, or should we open with something pretty broad? So, okay, Dr. Fried, you mentioned that science becomes leadership through communication. I thought that was a really strong message. And how have you seen that evolve in the course of your career? Has leadership evolved? Has communication evolved in science? And where is it going?
Hello? Does that work? You mean where's the field going?
Or have you seen an evolution of communication, of leadership, what it means to be a leader, a communicator in science and medicine through your career? What's changed? What's different? Where are things going?
So I would say that I don't see adequately leadership and communication on science, and I think it's, I mean, everybody here is doing it every day, but somehow the U.S. public, for example, has less commitment to science than I would say 20 and 30 years ago, and less valuing of making decisions based on knowledge and evidence. And if you look at the political discourse that we engage in, that's one evidence of that. So that worries me greatly and makes it even more imperative that we all learn how to do this at every stage. You know, what you can talk about when you're an assistant professor is different perhaps than the altitude you see when you're a center director or a department chair or a dean or the head of NIH. But at every altitude, what you see needs to be we need to learn how to express it in a way that helps our society value the role of science and knowledge.
Well, I'm absolutely a new devotee to Dr. Fried, but I have to disagree a little bit. I think the public is actually smarter than it's ever been, because we have to deal, as a professional association, we do answer questions and we're out there in the public. So it's a two-edged sword. They're smarter. And the AIDS epidemic had a lot to do with that. People, my grandmother knew what a T cell was, and that's really unusual. They're also seeking the easy answer. And the other edge of it is the misinformation that's out there. We have more information out than possible. And they want the easy answer, or they want the provocative answer. And a big issue is the anti-vaxxer program that's gone on. And the misinformation, if it's on the internet, if it's on a blog, it's real. And people will gravitate to easy rather than to correct or what's informational. So it's harder than it's ever been to communicate the correct answer. We do have a lot of public affairs, and I would just like to briefly introduce Monica Schneider, who is our AAI science policy analyst. And Monica went to undergraduate school at Butler University in Indiana, and then got her PhD at UNC with Jenny Ting in studied inflammation, and then came to us from her postdoc at Sanford Burnham in La Jolla. And she has more experience. I do less on Capitol Hill because by law I can't do very much. So she's sort of the surrogate. But we tell everybody who goes to Capitol Hill, we bring any member who asks, we have a public policy fellows program that any of you who are members of AAI could belong to. It's an in situ program. You don't have to be in Washington to do it. We'll train you and work with you remotely, but we do bring you to Washington. We have a very, very talented director of public affairs who was on Capitol Hill for many years. And it's a process. We teach scientists how to speak when they go to Capitol Hill. And the surprising thing is we tell them to speak at the middle school level. And that is not to diss the people. She's laughing. That is not to diss the people that you are speaking with. It's just that it's not their expertise, and you have forgotten how much you know as a scientist. And if you go in and start speaking in technical terms, you'll lose them. So we practice, we go over what has to be said, and try to hit. You have maybe a few minutes, and you may be talking to a staffer, not necessarily a congressman or a senator, but that staffer can influence the votes. Some of the things we tell people, we never say the word cure, because again, they want to hear, they want something sensational, and they want to hear that. And you never can overpromise, because they'll remember that. And then your credibility is out the door. Oh, I could talk about this for a while, but I'll try not to monopolize. I think right now, the lasers on science are huge. It's not just the casual public, but you know, we own and publish the Journal of Immunology, and I'm the executive editor, and we spend a lot of time on accusations of fraud. And people will do this on blogs, on the internet. Some are real, some are bogus, and as soon as it's out there, it becomes reality, and we have to deal with it, and that investigator has to deal with it. Sometimes it's frivolous, sometimes it's real, and sometimes it's retribution. So we have to sort all that out, but it's instant, and that's the bad side of the communication.
Answers. You had a question? Sure, sure.
Follow up on that. What is your perception, at least interest in science nowadays? We don't fund NASA like we used to. We don't. The public engages the science activism maybe the same way that in the past well, national pride associated with scientific research and a lot of achievements from the U.S. itself. I know that science has expanded considerably since that time. What do you feel is Congress and the public's perception of science? What's Can I just answer part of that quickly? I think we're in a really great opportunity right now, where we got a $2 billion increase to the NIH budget. And I think Obama's proposal was for a $1 billion increase, and we got a $2 billion increase from Congress. So I think that's a really good sign that they're understanding the importance of this institution. And it really bothered me, sequestration, because that was a lump, we hate government kind of movement. We're going to downsize all of government, despite the fact that there are elements of government that are very effective. We're a leader in the world in scientific biological research, and they did not consider that in that sequestration reduction, that they were hurting an institution that's really great in this country, something that we're real leaders in. And so it's great to see that starting to reverse, and it was bipartisan. So I think that's a really good sign. So I think the message is getting out to Congress that we're doing good things. This is for everybody. Wouldn't you agree?
I think the public is hugely interested. I think the problem is at the leadership. It's in Congress. And some of the push, despite this, I don't think this is biased, the enormous effort that went out from professional associations, not just us, but there are thousands of them who took, as we do, have public affairs programs, took people to Capitol Hill. Every one of you, or almost every one of you, is a voter. You have a district, you have congresspeople, you have senators. They need your vote. And a lot of this was pressure on the legislators to do the right thing. And it came from societies who engaged citizens. And as citizen scientists, if not you, who? You know best.
So I also want to add now with the internet and social media, it's providing another platform for the public to be engaged, and it's highly recommended that you can use that to get your message out. And all the ICs and all the universities have their own social media accounts, and that's one of the ways we share information accurately.
How do you deal with the conflict, or any idea or any cues that we can have as future leaders? When we communicate, we sometimes have a lot of conflicts. And it's good that you are now leaders to tell us a few cue points, or what we should do, or how do you address those conflicts when you communicate? Do I make sense, or no? Yep.
I think that
Did you mean like conflict in labs between people in your lab?
No, so basically, no. What I meant, you see, communication.
There's all
there is a
kinds of,
conflict
you're
right
not
now.
effectively communicating there.
Right.
Because there's many forms of conflict,
So-
from higher ups to people in your lab to,
Right. So what I meant is, like, all of you are leaders right now because you're in a higher hierarchy. Sometimes when you communicate as a leader, you get conflicts, right? How do you address them?
oh, okay. So
Do you
someone
got my
who's not
question now?
agreeing
Yes.
with your,
No, it's
your
not.
vision.
Right.
I think a big part of communication is listening. You've got to understand what their concerns are. So, in a leader, you're trying to move things in a certain direction, and I think Dr. Freed touched on this beautifully in her talk. That you got to bring people along with you. You've got to motivate them, excite them, and if someone is not understanding your vision, you've got to understand why that is. What is their fundamental concern? Is there something fundamentally different about their goal or their direction? So I think listening, for me, is a big part of, I've got my own ideas about where I think my science is going, but, I've got a lab full of highly trained people who are reading the literature, very, focused on their own research, and are also experts. So I've got to learn to listen to them, and, my ideas are not always right. So conflict comes up like that all the time. So I think listening, for me, is a big part of it.
One of the key skills of leadership is to learn how to love conflict. Because if you don't, you can't lead. But in the sense, not that you're trying to create conflict, but that you're responsible for leading change, and how otherwise there's no leadership, and how you lead change is always going to involve disagreement and misunderstanding and potentially backlash and conflict, and listening carefully all the time is key. But there are skills in leading change, really big, challenging, important skills that help. They don't eliminate it. But there are all kinds of courses you can take in managing conflict, which really are about learning to value people actually putting it on the table so that you can deal, as well as think about how to solve it. So conflict in itself isn't bad, but there are a lot of leadership skills for being able to lead change in a way that doesn't engender the kind of conflict that stops change. And that's the really worrisome part.
I think you have to understand also what's being thrown at you, if it's sincere or if it's personal, and there is a difference. But one of the things that we try to do is role play. If we're going into a meeting or we're going into something particularly contentious, I'll gather senior staff, and perhaps they're going or I'm going, and then we try to be that. What will they say? What will they ask? And, we're role-playing, and pretty soon we're mad, and we're arguing with them. But it's very helpful. First of all, it helps you keep your cool if you're going into a situation, but it prepares you for what might get asked, because you don't want to hear it. It's like, I don't want to hear that. They're stupid. And, they said they're going to ask, it's going to come up. How are you going to deal with it? So that's one way we do it.
I'll give you just one example. A number of years ago, I created a program that was a community-based program and was very engaged in recruiting, particularly African American older adults, to be in the program in communities that had historically hugely bad feelings about medicine and science and the way they'd been treated. And I was told that going out and trying to recruit African American older adults into this program was going to breed huge conflict. But I tried very hard to do my homework in the building of the program to understand what mattered to them. And what mattered to them really was to make a big difference. And this was a program in which we designed to do that. And so I'll never forget having a recruiting meeting with 30 older adults in the audience and all African Americans, and I explained the program and was very careful about really in language that would matter to people, because I'd spent so much time listening, help them see that this was a way they could really make a huge difference. But I explained the science, that they would have to be willing to be put into a lottery, and that some of them would get to do it, but they would be randomly assigned, and some of them wouldn't. But if they would participate in this way, which really is a randomized controlled trial, then we'd be able to see if what they did what mattered. And when it was done, they had a prayer circle, and the woman who led the prayer said, "Dear Lord, please let me be assigned to the experimental group." So everybody hears different things, and if you can appreciate what matters to them and what they need to understand and help them do it, then 90% more of conflict disappears.
Rich, do you have a question? Yes, please.
So kind of going off of that, what are your personal strategies for dealing with communication that is non-scientific, highly contentious personal issues such as religion when those come into the scientific realm? For example, I'm a stem cell biologist, and many people feel very personally about that. Apart from the scientific aspects, they have deeply ingrained religious issues. So how do you effectively communicate that without alienating those individuals?
That's a really tough question. I think if you get to the fundamental issue of what you're trying to do, which is improve people's lives, they hear that, that your mission is not malicious in any way, shape, or form, and that you're only trying to do things that are going to help people. So I think starting off with that, saying, you got to always have a catchphrase anytime you're communicating. You got to get people to. I thought your talk was really very well done because it was riveting. I listened to every word you said, and I'm not quite sure how you did that, but it was very effective. So I think capturing people's interest is really key. So I think you don't want to turn them off. You don't want to be defensive in the beginning. I think you got to say what your mission is and why you think it's important. And that there are technologies that are changing, right? That it's not as contentious as it used to be. We can convert fibroblasts to stem cells now, so it's less contentious. So I think reassuring them about that, that's where the field began. Look where it brought us. Being able to do that for a brief period of time really brought us to an amazing era in science. So I think just communicating it in a positive way can alleviate their fears. I think the better you do that, the more people you bring in, right?
Something I wanted to add, when people go into interviews, we sometimes provide training, and one exercise we sometimes recommend is a message map, which kind of sounds like a grade school assignment. It's just one piece of paper, you write down what your main point is in the center, and then you have 4 supporting points, and you can fill it in underneath. But everything is supposed to be lay-friendly, and whatever you're asked during the interview, there is a way to pivot it back to what's on your piece of paper, what is the message you want to deliver. And just going through that exercise could help you clear your thoughts and prepare for any tough conversations you might have.
I think there is a point at which you have a challenge versus an impossibility. And we don't, for whatever reason, have had, I don't know that I've ever had an issue that was religious, posed against a religion. But we do have animal rights issues. And we're also a member of NABRE, which is the National Association of Biomedical Research. It's a rather innocuous name, but it's the president's a woman named Frankie Troll, who's actually a horsewoman who proposes and supports a humane use of animals in research. So a huge amount of time is spent on this, and also we're in a very large consortium with 200,000 scientists that are members, and there are subcommittees on the use of animals in research. And for the very passionate, it's not a conversation. You know, there's nothing we can say. So we just hold tight to what we believe and try to be articulate about it.
This question is for Dr. Freed, so I just want to thank you again for such a relevant talk. And something that resonated with me, although the whole talk resonated with me, was you talked about kind of how to communicate to specific men in leadership, and you go trying to kind of know the verbal field. So I was kind of wondering, kind of play on words, can you give us kind of your playbook on how to kind of go about that?
I think every, how do I talk about this? Every leader, I mean, part of becoming a leader, which you will be your whole career, is acquiring a range of tools in your toolkit, and developing the skills to know which one, whether to pull out a hammer or a screwdriver for that particular carpentry problem. And you're going to speak differently to your boss than to your lab manager. But you're going to speak differently at a board meeting than I will one-on-one with a faculty member. So thinking about what that audience can hear is, to me, the very first step. Now, I've had a gazillion experiences. I don't even know which ones to point out, but I'll just say three things that are really critical. Because of when I started in medicine and science, throughout my career, I've been in places where really nobody wanted me to be there. And I had to be sure that I wanted to be there. That's really because nobody else was going to tell me they were happy I was there, quite frankly. So that was the first step. The second step, in terms of tricks, I'm a pretty shy person. I'm an introvert. I, by nature, I like to sit and listen before and understand where I am before I say anything. But I learned that I can't do that in certain circumstances. So you have to learn when I'm in circumstances where I am the only woman in the room, I always make sure to ask the first question. Always. Because then I exist. And I've cracked the ice of intimidation for myself because I already did it. And sometimes it's pretty intimidating. So once and that force, if you know you have to ask the first question, or you will not ever exist at that meeting, then you listen differently. You're a much more active listener than if you're just listening to receive information. You're using the information, and then you're getting much more out of the talk, actually. So there are a bunch of tricks I have learned over the years which actually have helped me a lot. The other trick is, and I have always assigned this to my fellows and my junior faculty, is to learn how to show up at a very intimidating cocktail party and give yourself the assignment that you're going to meet 3 people you never met before. And tell them about the passion of what you do and why it matters. That's the beginning of creating a network of friends and colleagues without whom you can't get anywhere. So those are 2 thoughts. I hope they're useful.
We're getting a couple of... Irene, do you want to ask a question?
How we engage as scientists with leadership, either by using our power as voters or speaking directly with congressmen. It did remind me very much of this gripe that I was hearing a lot in conversations in lab. It's not only that the people who decide our budgets don't necessarily understand the science, it's that they might not necessarily understand the experience of being a scientist, what it is to be at the bench day to day, what it is when questions lead to other questions that don't necessarily fall under what you applied for the money for, say. And it seems that this is also something that's playing out in the UK right now in medicine, where junior doctors are striking because the people who decide their policy that affects their day-to-day understand the importance of medicine, but don't understand what it is to be a junior doctor. And that kind of raised the question, not only how do we communicate with our leadership, but how do we directly increase the representation of medics and scientists in leadership? And I was wondering if, to anybody in the table, if you see a venue towards a channel towards increasing that representation.
Could you repeat what you said about increasing scientists in Congress? Is that
possibly? So, for example, I know AAAS has career tracks for scientists into policy. Do you see any more development in that direction?
Yeah, AAAS has congressional fellowships. It doesn't put people into Congress. They have one for NIH. They have them for Capitol Hill. It helps you work in Congress. You don't necessarily become a voting member, but absolutely, that's I've been a member of that review panel, and it's just a fantastic opportunity to get in and make a difference. But every one of you could, if you are a voting citizen, can go in and have that conversation, and it's a little bit of a pitch, but the way you do that, you can walk in, or you can be part of a professional association, whatever your field is, and ask them to help you with that. It is you. It is you that. The other thing, if you go back to your institutions, is work with your institution to have a congressman or senator come to your lab. They will come, and they. At our meetings, I'll say, okay, put your hand in the air. How many have done this? And nobody does it. But when they come, and you have to work through your institution, this professional associations defer to the institution, they love it. It makes a big difference.
So, so many years ago, I was a graduate, or not a graduate student, but a postdoc here, and one of my roommates is Greg Folkers, who is actually probably the key communications guy in NIAID's, really under Tony Fauci. He handles a lot of Tony's communication, does a lot of writing. And Greg was a really interesting person, and at one point he wrote this article about the portrayal of scientists in the public. Think about all the movies you've watched. Do you ever know how a scientist is portrayed? We're always portrayed as a little crazy, oftentimes scary, and this was what his article was about. And that's so far from the truth of what we do and who we are. And so I think it's always our mission to try and talk to our friends. I know I do this too. My mom asks me what I'm doing. She still does that. And the first thing I want to do is just shut down and say, Mom, you're not going to understand this. But I think it's really important to engage your family and friends as often as possible so they really understand what we do. I'll try and get that article from Greg. It was really a fascinating article about all the examples of movies and film that are used and how scientists are portrayed, and it's almost always in a negative light. And that's just some cultural thing. So we'll see if we can get that.
Dan?
I was completely engaged in your talk and really enjoyed it. I wanted to follow up. You mentioned about how the last line of our articles are the first line of journalists, and I wonder if the panel can address how you develop that parallel tracks of communication. I can't go to a conference and talk about new cure possibly in 2 years, and I can't go to a journalist and talk about error bars and confidence intervals. So you have to have these dual communication mindsets, and I wonder how you've all gone about developing that.
So it's the difference between talking to peers and talking to correspondents or science writers or the general public. Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, but specifically the kind of ways in which you need to talk about it, as in, whereas when you talk to scientists, you always want to correct and highlight caveats, whereas
so I think the
general public, you don't
scientists
want to
like
do
the
it.
details, and the general public want to know the punchline. You know, and think of a field you know nothing about. What do you want to know? And I think it can be as simple as hard as that. The hardest thing we do is get scientists to bring it down that it is effective communication. And they'll write something and we'll say, okay, now let's do that again and let's bring this down. It's very difficult. It's very difficult.
You have to work like crazy to be able to do that. It's really hard. I want to echo that, but and so you have to prepare even more than you do for a scientific talk. You have to know your audience, know what moves them, know what could matter to them. And that requires a huge amount of background preparation. And then you always have this as a scientist or a clinician, you have or a public health person, you have this tremendous responsibility to represent the science with integrity and not overspeak it, as you said before, not promise things we don't know, and yet be able to assert what we really do know without encasing it in so many caveats that nobody believes in it because that's what you've told them, we can't believe in it. It's really hard, but it really matters. So, when in my prior job as the chief of geriatric medicine at Hopkins, I talked to a gazillion groups of people living in assisted living and nursing home facilities to where they wanted me to come and talk about the science of frailty. Now, did I tell them probably what I'm going to say this afternoon? No. I mean, I didn't talk about complex dynamical systems. I didn't talk about telomeres. I didn't talk about mitochondria, but I said, do you know if someone's frail? And they all know when someone's frail. And then why it matters. They all, on some intuitive level, knew this was a problem. So then you have a starting point to talk about why the science might matter.
Someone once pointed out Scientific American articles start very, very, very basic, and then they work their way up. And it's like if you've ever listened to an Old English, someone speaking in Old English. In the beginning, you don't understand it, and then as they speak, you get attuned to it. And that technique, that's certainly a popular magazine in the general public, and that's another approach.
So there's a lot of resources within your institute. You don't have to go write an article yourself or write a press release yourself. There are people there to help you. And I work a lot with scientists writing about their recent publications in a way that the public would find interesting, but at the same time be accurate. And it's a really hard balance. There's a lot of editing going back and forth. It's a conversation. And I really encourage you to look for those people wherever you go. Each university will have a communications office. And it's also very important to review what they write. Over at NIH, we're very careful what we say, but that's not always the case if you go to another university. And if your name's on there, you should definitely look at it and see what they are saying, and is it, in line with what your findings show.
One of the, I'll just say that I think one of the challenges, I work with my communications office all the time, and I think the world of them, but I realize that there's no reason they should see the world that a dean sees or that a senior scientist sees. And so one of the challenges is how to, like if you wanted to put out a press release of a finding that you had that's about to be published, to really try and figure out what's hard as a junior scientist, which is the really big picture about what this matters. In general, there's no reason a communications officer would know that because it's your field. And it's the kind of big picture statement that really, people sort of arrive at many years in science, and yet I think it's that big picture about why this matters, how solutions could make a difference that sometimes talking to more senior people could help you find.
I just wanted to chime in with some questions that are coming from colleagues in the UK, and the first sort of harkens back to some policy issues. And one of our colleagues has asked, do you folks on the panel feel that there's a sort of moral imperative, being a physician or a physician scientist, a scientist, to be involved in these discussions, political and social? I mean, is that part of who you are and what you do?
We're all not jumping at that.
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
Because it's something I've had to wrestle with. It wasn't explicitly something I thought about at the stage that you guys are at, but I have been forced to think about it many times, and I think the answer is absolutely yes. But so, for example, I'll give you an example of the point at which I realized that the answer had to be yes. I was asked by the university president at Hopkins many years ago to lead a university-wide task force on how Hopkins could, what Hopkins should be doing to achieve equity of opportunity for women at the university as well as men. It wasn't an assignment I was looking for, to tell you the honest truth. And what I discovered is that the 40 people from across the whole university who I thought would be fabulous, men and women, to be on this, almost a person refused because they said nobody will ever do anything with it. So I talked them into to doing it with a promise that we would interrogate whether, in fact, we believed it was the mission of the university. And we did. We went through a very formal process of saying, is it a great research university's responsibility to care about these things? And we went into it not sure. But in fact, when you think about I'll talk about a university, but I think the mission of what we do in health and science is in the same park. We are entrusted by the public as great research universities in this country in particular, to create the knowledge for a better long-term future that will lay the foundation for the society we want our kids to inherit. And we are given the resources to hang in there until we find truth. That's amazing. It's an amazing privilege. But the responsibility that comes with that public entrust, and the public entrusting us with that, is a responsibility to make sure it happens, that it makes sure that knowledge transfer matters. But we're also entrusted with creating the leaders of the future who will create a better society. And all of those are implicit in who we are. But the third thing is the value of health. So health in the United States is not reified as a human right, but in many countries it now is. Health is a human right. And if that's the case, which I have come to believe is true, I didn't know I believed that many years ago, then how we invest in assuring that our science will make the best difference for health is critical, and how we explain that mission, because it's a societal it's a mission of societal values is critical. So we absolutely have to stand up and explain why we're in this business and what our values and mission are, and what the process is that will optimize our ability to meet those goals. And we absolutely are a better world to be a knowledge-based world and a science-based world. That's not all of great life, but but successful societies have to value that. So I think we have to be able to speak to those things.
I'll just add that I don't think everybody is cut out to lead the orchestra. I liked your analogy with being a soloist, being in a duet, etc. I think it's okay to actually stop at any one of those stages and just lead the choir, not do the orchestra. So those are all different stages of leadership, and I think when you get to that level, sometimes you can lose something and gain something different. So you have to make a conscious decision: do I want to leave a little bit of maybe my science behind to become more of an advocate for change and an advocate for an idea and communicating, that change? So it's always a balancing act where you want to take your career. Do you agree with that?
So circling back to the question about moral imperative, I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's a moral imperative, but I give you permission to do it. So many people don't feel that it's their right to do this, and it is. It's your right and your privilege to communicate your passion and to do it. As I said, if not you, who? And you know better than anybody who makes decisions about what you're doing.
Jamie?
For coming and visiting us, and all of you, even though, Dr. Nguyen, you're from here, you still had to take time away from your day to speak to us, so thank you. My question for you is, we kind of have this grand idea of leadership and communication at your level. But Dr. Freed, you said that we are leaders now. You would argue we are leaders now. So how do you recommend going about communicating, facilitating change from the bottom up?
Oh, I tried to talk about what the basic skills of leadership are. And I think cultivating them at the point you're at is critical, and that will provide a foundation for being able to build them going forward. And you'll use them every day no matter what you do. Your responsibility is to know how to play your violin right now. The most beautifully anybody could ever play it. And if you do that, people will appreciate the music a lot. I think if you can learn how to start developing skills to talk about what you're doing so your family believes in it and gets excited about it, that's incredibly hard and a great success, and that will give you the skills for all the next stages. You agree?
I think the thing I look for from the trainees in my lab is a passion. I love what I'm doing. I love our science. It's interesting how it's evolved over time. And when you first start your own lab, you never think that that you're going to grow up. Really, you're still just the trainee in the lab. I still do work in the lab. Trey can attest to that. But looking for that passion is so important for me because I'm really passionate about what we do. I think we're doing important work. I love what we do. I love the people I work with. I'm very picky about who I choose to come to my lab. I have to really like them. So I like to develop a relationship with them. But most importantly, I really want to see a passion. That it's not just me. My biggest job is being a cheerleader. I got to be a cheerleader for our work at all levels. And say what you're doing is important. I see the big picture here. But I want to get that passion back. So that for me is leadership from a trainee, is that they've engaged in the science, they're excited about it, and they're bringing ideas to me. I love that. I don't have all the answers, but I love that dialogue. So I think that's a way to become a leader in your lab really quickly, is display that passion to your PI as often as possible.
Again, every professional association and every meeting, national meeting, sometimes international meetings that you go to, often have sessions just going back to the issue of community or national, affecting change on a national level or community level. There are programs at all of these meetings that have something to do with public affairs or issues, certain issues, administrative burden, leadership, career development. It's very hard to do all your science, go to everything you want to hear, and then take time to do that, because inevitably they'll conflict with something. But there is that, and as I said, we have this unique Public Policy Fellows program that's open to postdocs and junior faculty, that you don't have to leave the bench to do it. You can do, and the Congressional Fellowship. So there's actual real activities you can take part in addition to having the street cred. As you said, you need to be able to walk the walk to be listened to as well.
There's actually a few more questions from colleagues in the UK. Just want to make sure that their voice is heard. This is a bit more focused, but it asks specifically about high pressure and high stakes presentations, and sort of building upon that. What do we risk via miscommunication with folks, and can failures in communication or failures in leadership be resolved?
I think you can risk everything. You know, a simple example of a high-stakes presentation might be a job interview. And I've had people, I've hired and interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, come in and not know anything about what they want. They don't know anything about the job, and they don't know anything about us. And so I'd say you have to do your homework, and again, that practice, and bounce your presentations off not just your friends, but people who maybe will attack you. You want to know before you get up in front of people what your weaknesses are in your data, what your weaknesses are in your presentation. Don't just give it to your friends or your mom, because she'll say it's all great. So make sure you get the controversial part, explore that part that makes you uncomfortable. And that can only make you stronger in case it comes up. Do your homework, practice, find out your weaknesses. Can you recover once you've gaffed? It's hard. I mean, you have to just move past it and do something else.
Yeah, look at Marco Rubio. We still see him grabbing for that glass of water.
Yeah, you'd rather not have it happen, but all you can do is go into it prepared. Do not be cavalier. Even for this presentation today, I have notes, right? Because you were kind enough to invite me. I think you're desperately important to the whole enterprise, and I want to be prepared. And you will never be prepared enough. You can't over-prepare.
Yeah, Dr. Fried said that in her talk. You know, every presentation is an important presentation you should take seriously. So how you present yourself is always important in every meeting.
So sort of getting signals that time to end. Maybe one more question. If not, we can continue. There it is.
How do you deal with people who already have their mind set, or they don't want to listen? So how do you overcome those challenges of communities or individuals, especially higher ups, that have the power to change, and yet they already have their mind set?
A feeling that's mine.
Yeah.
Very strategically. I mean, you have to do your best to understand what their mind is set about. Sometimes it's set about something that turns out not to have to be the biggest problem or the biggest focus. So you have to, as Tom said before, you have to listen like crazy and talk and try and understand where they're coming from. If you want books, there's a wonderful book about negotiation called Getting to Yes, which is a classic in the field for good reason. Plus, it's really easy to read. But this is in some ways the art of negotiation, is how you figure out how to create a win-win. That said, there are some people who are never going to come along. And part of the strategic, and in fact, they're going to be invested in making sure that everything blows up, quite honestly. And so the strategic question is how to, I mean, you think in medicine about early adopters, middle adopters, late adopters. Maybe you can think about these people as the never adopters. So you have to be clear, or maybe late adopters, how to bring along the 20% of early adopters and the 40% of middle adopters, and make it possible for them to believe in what's in the change that's being offered or needed or imagined. And there's always going to be 10 to 20% of people who are intent on blowing it up, if not taking you with them.
I also think as scientists, we tend to shy away from anecdotal or personal stories in order to make a point. And I mean, obviously it's a judgment call depending on the circumstance, but if someone is kind of appealing to their emotion and you throw numbers at them, they're not really going to see that. So if you have a personal story or something that can help them understand where you're coming from, it's, not a bad idea to share it, again, depending on the circumstance.
I'll add two other examples, actually, which you just made me think about, which are that you need to think about how to put something that seems like one thing into language and approaches that are in the value system of the person who's in the position to resist. And it is often possible to do that. So, for example, at Hopkins, when we first started in 1989 talking about gender equity, it was not a popular topic, and it was one that engendered a huge amount of resistance from the vast majority of people. To even talk about, no less believe, was something that had to be worked on. So how do you take something like that, which had immediate opposition from most people, and turn it into something that they would tolerate engaging on? And a lot of it has to do with value systems. So scientists and clinicians deeply care about fairness. Scientists and clinicians deeply are craftspeople in the sense that they care about doing things right as well as doing the right thing. And they reverberate with this language of science. So if you can turn, which we were able to do, a highly fraught issue into those terms on which you can grab the values and methods of thinking of people, then suddenly they may be in.
As a strategy, sometimes when we know we're going into a meeting where we're going to be dead, that they are 180 degrees, rather than we state it immediately and say, we understand this is your position, and say what it is, rather than have it be the elephant in the room. And it takes them off guard because they're winding up. But if we say, we know this and we understand it, but perhaps let us give you something to think about, and not saying we're trying to change your mind, not make it an argument, but we'll give you something to think about. And that's been effective. Not always. It's the 10% are never, they don't want to hear, but we don't make it an argument.
Fantastic discussion and dialogue. Thank you, members of the panel, and I hope we'll be able to continue this throughout the afternoon.